High representatives for the UN Alliance Civilizations, Excellencies, Holocaust survivors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Millie Magid, and I serve as the Chair of UN Affairs at B'nai B'rith International. It is my honor to welcome you to this program, marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Although our yearly event is typically held at the United Nations headquarters, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to go virtual this year. However, this program has been publicized by the UN as part of this week's official series of Holocaust commemoration events, and we are fortunate to be joined now by an international audience. We're deeply grateful to each of you for your participation, which is a testimony to the importance of remembering the Holocaust and of teaching its enduring lessons. Today's event, an annual tradition since 2006, reflects the uniqueness and vitality of B'nai B'rith's work, serving and representing the Jewish people while incorporating Jewish values into the service of all people. B'nai B'rith International, headquartered in Washington and active in 50 countries, was founded 178 years ago. It is the oldest and most widely known Jewish communal advocacy and service organization. We are known for our breadth of work, including our provision of emergency aid and disaster relief worldwide, our pioneering campaigns for religious freedom and human rights, our legislative and educational initiatives against any form of extremism and bigotry, our leading Jewish sponsorship of subsidized non-sectarian housing for low-income seniors in America. Not least, B'nai B'rith has been distinguished by a remarkable record of involvement at the UN, having been present for its founding in San Francisco in 1945. And maintaining multiple UN accreditations since 1947. B'nai B'rith is the only major Jewish organization with a dedicated full-time office of United Nations Affairs, with active representation at UN bodies in cities including New York, Paris, and Geneva. 15 years ago, we helped institute January 27th as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And now, today, I welcome all of you as I turn the floor over to our CEO, Dan Mariaschin, to introduce our very distinguished speaker.
Thank you very much, Millie, and thank you all for joining us today. As Millie noted, today marks the anniversary of the liberation of the notorious Nazi death camp, Auschwitz. Sadly, however, the Holocaust, which was the culmination of millennia of anti-Semitic incitement and took the lives of 6 million Jews, did not mark the end of anti-Semitism, even with the creation of the United Nations soon after. Rather, even in our day, we repeatedly see such outrages as a French family assaulted for listening to Hebrew language music in their car, or just the other day, an Argentine Jewish family that was brutally assaulted while they were on vacation. And too many Palestinian children are being taught violent hatred of the Jews. Neo-Nazi propaganda online has somehow blamed Jews for the COVID-19 pandemic. And even here in the United States, during the January 6th breach of the Capitol building in Washington, a participant was photographed openly, brazenly, wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Camp Auschwitz Staff." Clearly, the lessons of the Holocaust still have not been fully learned, and the oldest hatred continues to prove as resilient as ever. Thus, we're forced not only to remember the atrocities, the genocide of the Nazi period, but also to confront the ongoing lethal bigotry that often continues to feed on the lies of the Nazis. After all, prejudice that starts with Jews rarely ends there. And so global anti-Semitism remains an urgent challenge for all societies and for leading international institutions. To speak with us today about global anti-Semitism from a UN perspective is a highly distinguished official whom we have known for many years, Miguel Angel Moretinos. His Excellency Miguel Moretinos is the United Nations Undersecretary General, holding the post of High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations since January 2019. And he was designated last February by Secretary General Antonio Guterres as the UN focal point to monitor anti-Semitism and to enhance a system-wide response to it. Mr. Moratinos has committed his professional and political career to international relations and development cooperation and to peace and security, notably as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation in Spain from 2004 until 2010, and the European Union Special Representative for the Middle East peace process from 1996 until 2003. During his tenure as foreign minister, Spain presided over the UN Security Council and held the chairmanships in office of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and the Council of the European Union. Mr. Moratinos has received numerous recognitions and honorary doctorates, including from Ben Gurion and Tel Aviv universities. I would add that Mr. Moratinos is a former ambassador of Spain to Israel, and that he played an instrumental role in organizing the historic Madrid Peace Conference. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us on this somber day. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon from Madrid, and thank you very much, Mini Magid. Thank you for your introduction, and thank you, my dear friend Dan Mariaschin, an old friend for many, many meetings and many common adventure. Thank you for inviting me to this important event. And my first salute is for the Holocaust survivors, and in this special day. As you say, Dan, we are commemorating today the 76th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. And we want to take a stock of the lesson of the Holocaust. We should never forget the unimaginable horror that more than 6 million Jews went through. Their stories, all their stories told us by the resilient survivors inspired us with the strength and solidarity. 76 years seem like something of the past, but unfortunately, the resurgence in anti-Semitic attack, as you have just described, Dan, here in the United States, in Europe, in different places, is a stark reminder that hate against Jewish or anti-Semitism that was manifested in the Holocaust is still present, unfortunately, in our communities today. Last week, I was in Moscow, and I visited the the Hebraic Museum, they call it the Tolerance Museum, and I was with the chief rabbi of Russia, Ber Lazar, and he conducted me through the dramatic history of Russian Jews throughout history, and particularly about the Holocaust. He told me that 20% of the Holocaust that were part of this tragedy, this dramatic and acceptable tragedy, were coming from Russia. Anyhow, as the world is battled today, a deadly pandemic, we also witness a sharp rise in neo-Nazism and far-right extremism ideology spreading like wildfire in mainstream media in the dark web. Their toxic hate targets Jews as well as other communities. The figures speak by themselves. An FBI report on hate crime in the United States, released in November 2020, recorded 953 hate crimes were committed against Jews in 2019, a 40% increase from the 835 recorded in 2019. The deadly anti-Semitic attack on Jews in the US in Pittsburgh and Powell were committed by white supremacists. In 2019, hate crimes against Jews constitute 60% of all hate crime based on religion, a slight increase from the 58% recorded in 2017 and 2018, of the sake of comparison. Muslim was the next most targeted group at 30.2%. The 2020 report of UN Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Form of Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, Intolerance, and a study by the Jacob Blaustein Institute for the Advancement of Human Rights state that there has been an 18% increase in anti-Semitism globally alone. All such incidents were not limited to anti-Semitic rhetoric, but also attack on Jewish religion and secret sites. Such incidents were fueled by conspiracy theory that COVID-19 virus had been manufactured and spread by Jews, as you mentioned, Dan. Terrorist attacks, like on the synagogue in Halle in 2019, and on the Kosher supermarket in Paris in 2015, and in Graz, Austria last August, show us that anti-Semitism has not been eliminated in Europe, despite earnest effort by many European member states. What for me and for I think all of us is worrying is that these evil forces continue to spread their menace and twisted ideology. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned yesterday of the certainty that neo-Nazi activities are taking place everywhere, undetected and unchallenged. Such atrocities are an affront to the right of everyone to freedom of religion and belief and the freedom of practicing the right without fear. This right is rooted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In this context, I was very encouraged by the substantive steps that many European countries have taken in combating anti-Semitism, such as the growing number of countries endorsing IHRA definition, and the growing number of envoys and coordinators tasked with overseeing effort in combating anti-Semitism. I also follow with great interest the initiative and strategy that were either launched or are still in the pipeline by the European Commission, such as the comprehensive strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. The OSCE has also been well on addressing the security needs of the Jewish community and countering anti-Semitism through the education. So let us ask ourselves, what is the role of United Nations? I'm aware of the perception existing even today between the Jewish people, Jewish community in Israel about the UN, and reciprocally, UN about Jews and Israel. So even if the UN has been the house of Israel since recognition as a state, so how come we are going to change this perception? That, I think, is my main mandate as being focal point in the fight against anti-Semitism. So I think we could establish certain action that it will reconfort and will give more confidence between UN and the Jewish communities and Israel. Number one, I think we should continue to focus in combating hate speech, upholding the right of all to exercise their religion or belief freely and safely. It needs to be a real priority for the United Nations. To this end, the UN Secretary General launched in 2009 two important plans, a plan of action on hate speech and the UN plan of safeguarding religious sites. Both plans complement each other and aim at countering all forms of discrimination and racism, including, of course, anti-Semitism. Prevention is the key word in combating all forms of hate, including anti-Semitism. Secondly, how many resolutions exist in the UN system to support and combat anti-Semitism? And I have to recall that the United Nations General Assembly has adopted Resolution 60-7, which reject any denial of the Holocaust, a historical event, either in full or in part. That Resolution 61-255 condemns any denial of the Holocaust. The Holocaust Remembrance Resolution also designates 27 January as an annual International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust, observed with ceremonies and activities at the United Nations headquarters in New York and UN offices around the world. I have myself reinforced this resolution by writing to all member states encouraging them to nationally observe or organize activities on that day. And I will continue to follow up on that. Thirdly, following the important report of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief, our friend Dr. Ahmed Zahid, the United Nations Secretary General, as you mentioned, has designated me in February 2020 as the UN focal point to monitor anti-Semitism and to enhance a system-wide response to anti-Semitism. Since June 2020, I have been reaching out to, engaging with more GOS organizations, envoys and coordinators of combating anti-Semitism, and in UN relevant entities and bodies. I have been also monitoring closely trends in anti-Semitic incidents around the globe and reacting strongly against them. Being vocal about anti-Semitism at the highest level is, I think, a very important manner to denounce them. Fourthly, moreover, anti-Semitism, successful United Nations Secretary General has been vocal in their criticism of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, calling for exerting more effort in combating anti-Semitism in a highly visible way. In January 2015, the United Nations General Assembly held its first ever special session on the rise of anti-Semitic violence worldwide. The event was co-sponsored by US, Israel, the 28 members of the European Union and other countries, and featured as a statement by speeches by UN Secretary General and a number of government officials. Just 2 days ago, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, emphasized at the Holocaust Remembrance service at Park East Synagogue that the United Nations will continue to stand with you and against lies, bigotry, and hatred of all kinds. In June 2019, the UN General Assembly held an informal session on combating anti-Semitism, another form of racism. The meeting was organized at the initiative of the Israeli UN mission, and was over 90 countries participated, including representatives from Syria, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, and Morocco. Secretary General Antonio Guterres opened the session saying, "I guarantee you that I will continue to call out anti-Semitic racism and other forms of hatred loudly and unapologetically." For the past 15 years, the UN Outreach Program of the Department of Global Communication continues to remind the world of the lessons to be learned from the Holocaust in order to help to prevent future acts of genocide and encourage development by United Nations member states of educational curricula of the subject of the Holocaust and to mobilize civil society for education and awareness. Meanwhile, I carry out the role designated to me by the UN Secretary General, and I plan to convene soon, I think at the end of February, beginning of March, a meeting with major Jewish organizations and voice on combating anti-Semitism and relevant UN bodies to create synergy between relevant stakeholders and enhance a system-wide response based on human rights approach. I find many areas that we can tap into and strengthen together. For example, number one, enforcing mechanism for monitoring and reporting anti-Semitism. I see that one of the challenges here is the absence of internationally agreeable definition of anti-Semitism, which hinders the identification and reporting of the acts, verbal or physically, that are considered as anti-Semitic. I plan to work on having an agreeable definition of anti-Semitism within the UN based on the Hebrew definition, which constitutes a basis to start with. Secondly, education is key. Peer-to-peer education to teachers, children, young people, political parties, and civil society. Those groups, when equipped with knowledge, political will, be better enabled to undertake the responsibility in combating and curbing such a crime. Developing global citizenship education program will be also another area we could focus on anti-Semitism and educating about the Holocaust and all forms of discrimination based on race, religion, belief, ethnicity. Number three, we have to continue to engage and collaborate with social media companies, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, so identify the right line within the framework of international human rights law. Number four, governments which have the primary responsibility to protect its citizens are encouraged to take a robust approach to combating hate speech, but within the framework of international human rights law, which call on government to prohibit a speech where it amounts to advocacy of religious hate that constitutes incitement to hostility, discrimination, or violence. Number 5, mainstreaming combating anti-Semitism within the UN system. We have already started. We have an informal meeting within the UN family and was to discuss about how to fight racism within the UN system. And I use the opportunity to raise the concern about anti-Semitism. So my work and my goal will be how we, inside the UN system, we cannot be tolerant zero against any anti-Semitic attitude or act. Number 7, finally, UNOSC, United Nations Our Civilization, will start mainstreaming awareness and education about anti-Semitism in the new iteration of our program targeting youth. Last but not least, anti-Semitism must be understood in the broader concept of racism and other forms of hatred and related intolerance toward the other faith community. So my dear friends, I want to conclude by quoting late Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Sacks, who has famously said, and you mentioned that also in your speech, the hate that begins with Jews never ends there. I echo Rabbi Sacks' words and add that hate is hate, be it directed against Jews, Muslim, Christians, or another individual based on their religion, belief, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. We should all of us embark in this common battle. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your comprehensive remarks and for your ongoing, and we hope deepening, partnership and participation in confronting global anti-Semitism. We now have just a bit of time for questions from our audience, which may be submitted by clicking on the Q&A button on your screen. And while those questions come in, I'd like to get the conversation going by asking the High Representative, on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, to what extent do you think is there awareness in the international community of anti-Semitism as a current, not just a historic problem? And as firsthand witnesses to the Holocaust pass on, what more can be done to ensure the dangers of incitement will be better understood?
I think if we look back in the recent year, we could have, in general, within the UN member state, let's say an increase of countries that are being, I think, much more aware of the importance to this Remembrance Day and the importance of joining all of us in combating anti-Semitism at that situation. That was the reason that since 2 years, I took the initiative of the group of friends of the United Nations Alliance of Civilization that is composed by 150 countries, organization, that to call on them to the countries that till now they have not adopted, they have not included in the national policy this Remembrance Holocaust Day. I remember myself being Foreign Minister of Spain when I decided in 2000, I think it was 2006, to include this Holocaust Remembrance Day in Spain and on the 27th of January. And thanks God, I think since then, Spain has been very active to recall this unforgettable tragedy, at the same time to work for the future. So my idea is to really continue to give to these countries and these nations that are not yet with us the sense of the importance and the necessity to include this Remembrance Day as part of their own system. What can be done more? I think then we will come back, I think, in other question of the importance of education. I think the 27th is the day that we will look back on history, but we have to look also to our present, our future. And that is where we have to really take the lesson of the Holocaust and try that this never again will be a reality. And this never again can only be successful if we start from the primary school, secondary school, at all levels, to spread this education, this way to remember what have to be totally forgotten in our mind, our heart, in order that we never repeat such a tragedy, such a awful situation. So I think two elements, both think to continue to pressure and to involve countries as many as we can. I think we were, when we talk about anti-Semitism, what we can identify normally is more Europe, European countries, America, some American, Latin American, but we have now dedicated a little of time to Africa and Asia. That it doesn't mean that they are similar to Europe or the United States, but we cannot ignore them, and we have to be alert, even particularly in Africa. That I think that's an area that I'm going also to develop a lot of my activities in the next month.
Well, what you've said about education is certainly important. I think I read even this morning that last year in 2020, some 17,000 Holocaust survivors passed away, 900 of them from COVID. And these people who were victims of this brutality, many of them have really been at the spear point of educating because of their own personal experiences. And as they pass on, as I said a little bit earlier, it really is incumbent on all of us to pick up that obligation we're not firsthand witnesses, but certainly to learn from them as we have learned from them and learn from others, and from scholars and others, to educate about the Holocaust. With that, I'd like now to turn this over to our Director of UN and Intercommunal Affairs, David Michaels, to relay a few questions from our audience. David?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Excellency, for being with us and for your very instructive remarks. We've received a few questions already about the IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which you had mentioned earlier. As you noted, IRA has delineated a working definition of anti-Semitism that encompasses both older and newer forms of anti-Semitism, including the extreme demonization or delegitimization of Israel as the world's only Jewish state. As you know, a growing number of countries and international institutions have adopted this critical working definition. How can the UN help to employ it?
Well, I think this definition of IRA and definition of anti-Semitism is key, because if we agree about the definition, we can even immediately be much more operational in order to condemn and to act and to pursue and to persecute the people who violate that this act that are included in the definition. From I see from my responsibility as a focal point, I already say formally and publicly that I support IRA definition. I think it's a well-balanced definition. It has been, well worked, and there is a lot of countries that have been already adopting it. It is true that my goal, and that is my ideal action, is to really enlarge the number of the people of the countries that have adopted the IRA definition, and to come to at the end of the year, the sooner as we can, with a bigger number. The ideal was to have 193 members of the United Nations. We are now in the process to see how we are going to proceed in order that we can really extend and get much more supporters to this definition. I'm sure that out of 193 countries today, I think with international organization and member state, we are talking about 40 recognition In state, I think it's only 28, 30, around 20, 30. So I'm sure in the last month we have seen there have been some countries that have joined, have adopted this IHRA definition. So the idea is to, and I'm sure we are going to get, most of them didn't know, apart in Europe, apart in certain areas of the United States or Middle East, etc. But the rest of the continent of Africa, for instance, or Asia, most probably didn't even never heard about IHRA definition. And so I think it will be not too many difficulties to get immediately from 30 member states to 90, 100, more or less. The question mark, we should immediately after that, we get a bigger number of countries joining this IHRA definition. What we will do with those who have still some problem with certain part because they don't understand clearly, they want some clarification, they want some, indication what means exactly, what you mentioned about Israeli policies, etc. So we have to be very cautious about that, but we have to also recognize that there are some countries that for the moment, they are maybe not ready to join this definition. So what will be our attitude towards them? I'm not going to enter in reopening the IHRA definition and to start a negotiation process, but I need to gather as much as we can countries working together in anti-Semitism. So we have now, with my team, we are thinking how we are going to proceed in the next future. In the meeting that I announced in my speech that we are going to call to all Jewish organizations and the UN entities at the end of February, beginning of March, I think I will develop a kind of plan of action how I'm going to work on that. But for me, it's going to be one of the main issues of my mandate, how to increase the countries that adopt, this definition.
Thank you very much. Our next questioner is from Thailand, where the writer writes, many are still ignorant to the Nazi atrocities. In past years, many Thais cosplay or dress up as SS soldiers, and even a celebrity wore a swastika t-shirt on stage. It is the result of many Thais not learning about this part of international history since they feel it is, quote, not relevant. What should we do to help raise awareness to people in far-flung parts of the globe who think it isn't important to learn about this specific chapter called the Holocaust?
I think, as I was telling at the beginning of my answer, one of your questions, of Dan Mariaschin question, I think that is the reason my mandate is not only to address the fight against anti-Semitism in the traditional geographical areas, Europe and United States, that of course we will continue to do. But also, as this question put very clearly, we have to start to work in the global scenario. And why? Because nobody can escape. These white supremacists and neo-Nazis, they are linked. I mean, they were product of the European history. So people are not familiar with, as the question mentioned, we don't know as the history of our past, but now they are connected by all kind of new technological means. And these people, they are connected from, from strong French philosopher or ideologue of these neo-supremacists or white supremacists in Norway, in the United States, in New Zealand. Who could imagine New Zealand so far? And they were attacked by neo-Nazi by a guy, well, against, in that occasion was against Muslim, but it could happen against Jews. And so we cannot ignore the threat that anti-Semitic attack can take place any place in the world, including Thailand or including anywhere. So we have to prepare and to act in these countries in order to raise awareness through education, some program, and that is what I will try to do. That is the role of the UN. The UN is the global, is the whole, human community. So that is our task, not only to concentrate in the traditional areas that this anti-Semitism is growing, is more present, but to be alert in order to avoid such a kind of act in other countries, areas that in principle they are safe, but we have to be on alert in order to avoid this attack. So we will be ready to help if this gentleman is concerned about Thailand. We can organize some program, some youth encounter in order to disseminate the good values, the good principle, and of course the remembrance of this atrocity of Holocaust.
Well, thank you, Excellency. Our next question says, prior to your role at the UN, as was mentioned, you had served as Spain's foreign minister. As you, of course, well know, the history of the Spanish Jewish community is among the most culturally rich, as well as among the most tragic in the history of Jewish civilization. What do you bring to your current role from your knowledge of Spain's history, and what can you say about the long-term implications of anti-Semitism given Spain's experience?
I think Spain has been through history. We have the golden years where all the three monotheistic, the three Abrahamic religions live together in peace, and they produce a magnificent, result. I was MP when I was in political arena in Spain. I was MP from Cordoba, and I was very proud, Cordoba, Andalusia. I was very proud to see that it was the town of Averroes, Avicena, and Maimonides. And they were living together. So that is the positive element. Then there's the dark ages of the Inquisition of Spain, the expulsion of the Jewish community during the kingdom of the Catholic King of Spain. And then, unfortunately, till recent years, when we finally, King Juan Carlos, His Majesty King Juan Carlos, made his speech in the Knesset in a very formal manner of reconciliation between Spain and the Jewish with our common Sepharad, a common Spain. So I think we can learn a lot of what has been positive in the way Jewish can be a galvanizing factor for understanding and tolerance, and also at the same time the dark edges that we have not to repeat again. I am in very close contact with the Jewish community in Spain. I think as I was foreign minister, as I told you, I created the Holocaust Day for Spain. We opened a house, what we call the Sepharad House. I created this concept in order to have the special place for Jewish community and Israel activities in Spain. And I think now with my new mandate, I'm being also trying to be in touch with all of them in order to provide our experience and to be useful for that. So Spain, with Sepharad, we have this sense of tremendous legacy, and this legacy have to be put it into the positive for the future. But I think Spain, I think the government of Spain has adopted IHRA definition, so there is no question of how the Spanish, I would say the many political trends of Spain are absolutely in the fight against anti-Semitism.
Thank you. We have two related questions on a point that you had made, Excellency, a few minutes ago. One writer sends this comment. We thank you for being with us on this solemn day and deeply appreciate the Secretary General's groundbreaking decision to appoint a focal point to monitor anti-Semitism. But we all are aware of the elephant in the room. As you had mentioned, for many in the Jewish community, the UN is a place itself where anti-Semitism can be found, from unrelenting and disproportionate focus on Israel to the so-called former Zionism is racism resolution, to speeches occasionally from delegates comparing Israel to Nazi Germany or apartheid South Africa. What can you do to further convince the community that the UN is taking anti-Semitism within the system seriously? And the second question relates to the Abraham Accords, the recent progress made in relations between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, and we hope others soon. Since anti-Zionism can manifest a form of anti-Semitism, are we using the success of the Abraham Accords effectively to teach people to engage with the Jewish presence in the Middle East and with Israel, rather than attempting to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel in order to isolate it?
Well, to the first question, I refer in my speech, in my introductory speech, that is, I think, one of the main tasks of my mandate. No, I was inspired how Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in the issue of gender, of women, he had distributed internally a kind of guidelines or code of conduct within the system, in order that the gender issue should be, respected and supported and have to be monitored, that they will not accept. So, inspired by that, as I told you in one of the recent meetings we have with all the Secretary General and other UN agency organizations that we used to have every month as a coordinating meeting of all the UN entities. When we were addressing the racism issue, I took the floor and I already announced that I'm going to promote an internal, let's say, code of conduct or guidelines within the system, that each UN staff member, employee, director general, civil servant, in their declaration, their attitude, their behavior, there will not be, any anti-Semitic attitude. That zero tolerance within the system. Of course, then we are member states. Member states that you cannot, the UN try to avoid to have, and that's the reason I mentioned in my speech the number of UN General Assembly resolution, the UN Secretary General statement and commitments, and I have to say that Secretary General Antonio Guterres, as he told me, and he has been vocal in the recent years since he was appointed as Secretary General, his fight against anti-Semitism is one of her key priorities. And he's demonstrating that, by my appointment, by his stand and different moments. And so you can count on him 100%. So within the system, we will try to improve that, and we are going to improve that. And I think, of course, member state, you cannot avoid some member state to criticize Israel or not, but as a systematic attitude of what the Jewish community and some Israeli people consider, they will not be an anti-Israeli or anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish attitude within the UN. That is going to be my main concern and my main task. So the HERA definition allow to have the same criticism to Israel to have to any other country. but no more than that. You have not to use anti-Israeli policy to demonize Israel, only to be a Jewish, that have to be criticized. So that's the element that some countries that don't understand, and we are going to try to explain to them. And so I think that will be my main task, to try to get within the system a better attitude, a better understanding on how to all of us have to combat anti-Semitism and how we have to behave ourselves in order that we can recreate and rebuild the trust and confidence among ourselves.
Thank you. We have two more related questions. The first is, what is the role of the UN Alliance of Civilization?
Sorry, I didn't ask. I didn't respond to Abraham Arcod. Okay. I think, everybody, I welcome them. I think I already did, because I've been always, even in my period of AU Special Envoy, and my previous period of Foreign Minister of Spain, I will always work for normalization. When you normalize relation, and even more between Arab country and Israel, it's a good news. I think it's a news that we have to really take into positive, because that will reinforce the capacity of both sides to work for peace. So I think it's a very, very good news. And I think it's going to open, even at the beginning, there were some, let's say, comments from here and there. I think everybody in the region, and I know that by experience, they are looking for peace. The question how we get this peace to be, achieved. If we get people that being normalized, being integrated, and to be, in much normal context, I think we can develop a much better trust and confidence between Arabs and Israelis. And that will permit to understand each other better. And at the end of the day, they will come with, I hope, with some proposal that have to come for reinforcing what I still consider the only best solution for putting an end to this conflict is the two-state solution. So it doesn't mean that the Abrahamic Accord are going to undermine the Palestinian rights. No, I think the same. My idea is that we will normalize all of us, that they will have this normalization process taking part with all the Arab countries. They will even go Palestinian, Israeli, the European, and Palestine, etc. But to start with, as many countries, Arab countries, normalize with Israel, is a good news, because that will create a different dynamics. And diplomacy, my dear friend, new dynamics are needed. We need good news. We have been in the last years without any good news. So that is a good news. Let's put as a positive element, but of course, we cannot ignore that still the conflict needs to be, resolved by the two parties with the help and support of international community.
Before we return to the question, the institutional question of the Alliance of Civilizations and its relationship to other UN entities, on this point, Excellency, of normalization, we had a question about member states that continue to discriminate only against Israelis in preventing admission to their countries. This is something that really reflects, I think, an outdated approach to the region, especially when we see more and more Arab countries formally, openly engaging with Israel. What can the UN do to prevent discrimination on religious and national grounds when it comes to allowing country-to-country visits or person-to-person exposure?
Well, in general, one of the principles of the UN is to fight against any kind of discrimination. So I think if there is some country that by their internal law, in their sovereign right, decide that some countries have the right to enter. Well, we can criticize that. We can say, hey, let's hope that they will enter in a normalizing process. But we have certain limits. No, I can imagine you mentioned some other country that if you show the Israeli passport, they don't allow you to enter. Well, that's happened unfortunately since the start of the conflict in the Middle East, and I think it's going to be difficult to change before we get a permanent peace or a normalization process that will be extended to everybody. But in general, I think there are Jewish communities even in such a countries, and I think that is what we have to also take care of that, And some of these countries that are no normalized relation with Israel, some of them are also protecting the Jewish communities, and that's what we can do. We can intervene for that, to protect them, and that's what we will continue to do.
I wonder, going back to the Alliance of Civilizations, if you can speak to the relationship between the Alliance and other UN bodies, including UNESCO, in fighting anti-Semitism. And another of our questioners asks, the UN's Holocaust Remembrance Program posts an impressive amount of information about combating the hatred and abuse associated with the Holocaust, the massive killing and abuse that took place during that period. Will these materials be used in education and training of UN personnel at country offices around the world? How else can you help to reach UN personnel on these issues?
Yes, I think the United Nations Alliance Civilization is a young entity of UN. We have only 15 years. It was launched by Secretary General Kofi Annan in 2005, and it's a political instrument of Secretary General in order to really facilitate peace and security and understanding and respect all around the world. So we work hand by other entities, mainly UNESCO, because there are areas where we, let's say, complement each other, education, culture, but our way to work is different, our mandates are different. In this case, I think what UNESCO is doing, I think is doing extremely well. They started this program about remembrance of Holocaust Day, and they have already reached out certain UN staff member abroad or personnel in order to teach them, to give training courses, and they are working extremely well, and we are supporting that. We can continue to complement that, to multiply the action. So it will be well coordinated. We have excellent relation, of course. It cannot be differently with our friend from UNESCO. Audrey Azoulay is my dear friend. He's a fantastic Director General, and then she's working extremely hard and very sensitive, extremely sensitive on this anti-Semitism issue. And we divide our roles in order not to duplicate, and the contrary, to multiply the capacity and to make better results at the end of the day. So I think it is true, it's a complex world, but we have to be accustomed to that. No? Today we have different entities, each one has their own added value. We have to find this added value. My added value on this issue is to really monitor, to enhance, the way we look to the future. Of course, Remembrance Day, they have already Global Communication Department and UNESCO. They are doing a fantastic job. Let's continue to do this job, but I have to focus in other areas that have not been addressed so well till now in the fight against anti-Semitism. So what I said, the new anti-Semitism. So we have to reach out, as we say, to Thailand, to Africa, to Latin America. We have to reach out with, this religious leader, how to protect religious side. We have to reach out how to engage with the social network in order that we can stop the hate speech and this kind of attitude of the social media that can complicate enormously, we have to start to work, and we are ready to fight against this neo-Nazism and neo-supremacists, that also is part of the new way that we have to address, and that is what we'll try to do.
Thank you. You mentioned, Excellency, Holocaust denial. And our writer sends this question. Holocaust denial is a continuing and perhaps growing problem. How can this terrible and very irrational phenomenon, although I think most of us would agree that anti-Semitism itself is irrational, how can it be explained and how can it be countered in the face of all of the evidence?
I think with Holocaust denial, we have to be brutal. I think we cannot accept that. I mean, it's something that is against humanity. It's against any kind of justice in the whole world. So no way to excuse, no way to understand, no way to accept, no way to even allow that this conduct or this manifestation of this declaration could take place, So in all these issues, we have to be brutal, but in this one, in particular, denial, how you can deny such a crime, such a genocide, such an atrocity, such a human atrocity. I mean, if we want to continue to have a little sense of humanity, you have at least to understand, to recognize what the human beings have able to do, and that's absolutely unacceptable. So I think in our criticism and in our action against, to fight against anti-Semitism, this denial have to be number one in order to immediately act. And for that, I think law enforcement in the national internal law, in the national legislation, should be one element that have to be adopted by everyone, So that's something that in 21st century, we cannot accept that there will still some people or some country on behalf of the freedom of expression to deny the Holocaust. It's what, it's a very sensitive issue, freedom of expression, respect of freedom of religion and conscience, and this attitude. So where is the borderline? It's not a question of borderline, it's the human rights. And human rights here is the human right to live and not to be executed like it were executed, the 6 million of Jews. So there is no freedom of expression to put to doubt that. So I think I'm taking my personal view, but I think the great majority, I would say everybody should be in this line. So my idea is that as soon as we can put into the internal legislation this issue, the better, in order that we can exert by the law enforcement and not to give any chance to anybody to express this denial.
Well, thank you, Excellency Dan. I think we have time for just one last question. The final question relates, September 2021, this year, marks the 20th anniversary of the UN's Durban Anti-Racism Conference. Sadly, for the Jewish community, the conference brings back painful memories. An NGO conference document considered so anti-Semitic that High Commissioner Mary Robinson could not accept it. Street demonstrations where we saw such manifestations as signs equating the Star of David with the swastika, and a walkout of the conference by Israel and the US after it became clear that the agenda would be politicized and hijacked, culminating in the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, which singled out only Israel for implied characterization as racist. This was followed by the Durban Review Conference in 2009, which featured a speech by Iranian President Ahmadinejad, a Holocaust denier. The UN has decided that there should be programming marking the 2001 Durban Conference later this year. What measures, if any, might the UN take to ensure that the commemoration does not add to Durban's problematic legacy for Jews?
Well, I can't tell you that what happened in Durban was so negative, and we all understood the position of Israel and the Jewish communities. I think 2021, we are living a total different world. And that's the reason I was saying before that what happened that in Durban? In Durban happened because there was a political strategy from some parties and a tremendous ignorance from the majority of African countries about, the Holocaust, Remembrance, Holocaust Day, etc., and anti-Semitism in general. It's not the case today, but if we work from what we are going to try to do ourselves, myself as a focal point, to work from now on to share with African friends what is at stake, what were the position of all of us, I think we would be on the ground, on the safe ground, to really avoid any kind of repetition of Durban. Be sure that we are going to be alert, and we are going to avoid that, we are going to stop. United Nations Alliance Organization were thinking after what happened in United States about Black Lives Matter, that a conference on racism in general should be convened. I don't know, this year, next year, well, and not to repeat Durban, on the contrary, to bring together all of us in this fight against racism. And I think anti-Semitism is racism. And so people are racist if they attack Jewish, or they provoke Jewish, or they are criticizing Jewish. And so I think we have really to be alert on that. It's good that you refer to that, because that, the calendar sometimes goes independently. That's the reason we have to really, that's as part of my mission, to really be assured that any UN entity doesn't go in a contrary line, in different line that we try to put. And so it's good that you recall today in this webinar, in order that we can have a look and be sure that nothing similar will be repeated like in Durban.
Thank you. And Dan, I return to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, David. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but we would like to thank the High Representative, Miguel Moretinos, for a truly important and timely discussion on this International Holocaust Remembrance Day. A recording of this conversation will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. For B'nai B'rith President Charles Kaufman, UN Affairs Chair Millie Magid, David Michaels, and our colleagues, we'd like to thank you all for joining today. We look forward to seeing you again on future B'nai B'rith programs.